There is a legend about how this world was once created. A long time ago, there lived a god named Fable. Being the only one, he felt lonely, so using his powers, he created this world. But after that, Fable thought of giving the same-looking people differences. So Fable created people and divided their world into 3 groups: ordinary people, blessed people, and cursed people, fates that were predetermined from birth. The damned will be damned forever. The blessed will forever be blessed. And also among these few blessed and cursed were those whom Fable made even more special. Fable shared his power with them, the power of the FBL. They say it was the power of the whole world, and its name is Fable, and this story is theirs. The story starts with a girl walking down an alley. She was very unhappy with the weather. It was very wet, and the ground squelched under her feet. That was why she didn't like to leave the house after it rained. It was very narrow, and there were no people in the alley, which made her afraid. Because of this weather, she was more scared this time than before. She hated walking a lot, but she only found this shortcut. She had an envelope. It was a message from Lumiere of the Union of the Blessed. The letter stated that there would be a meeting on February 28th, and the organizer would very much like fables from around the country to attend. She was clearly investigating something, but she had no desire to go to this meeting, but she had to attend. Suddenly, someone walked along this path in front of her. She was greatly surprised, for she had never met anyone here before. And this man had some kind of envelope fall out of his pocket. He didn't notice it and went around the corner. The girl picked him up off the ground. He was all dirty and wet from the rain. It was an invitation like hers. He couldn't enter the meeting without it, even though it was in the dirt, but she thought it best to return it. As she rounded the corner, all she saw was the man's cloak. She tried to yell to him that he had dropped something, but it was as if he didn't even hear her and kept walking on as she asked him to stop. Coming around another corner, she was sure she would find him there. She had walked around here a lot and knew there would be a dead end. But on getting there, she was shocked. The man wasn't there. It was very strange. She was sure she saw him walking this way. And looking back down at the ground, she saw that there were only her footprints. She was sure she had followed him. She was in a stupor. She couldn't have imagined it all. She had definitely found the invitation. And then suddenly this man showed up behind her. She tried to quickly turn toward him, but he was quicker and grabbed her arm. And then the stranger asked her a rather strange question. "What are you doing?" She began to tell me that the man in the cloak had dropped the invitation. She had just followed him to give it to him. The unknown man snatched the envelope from her hand and hid it under his cloak. The girl turned to him, but with great apprehension, and said that he had frightened her badly and had nearly torn her arm off. The guy also reacted like the girl. Because the letter was in the mud, he experienced discomfort. He turned around, and the girl noticed that he did leave footprints when he walked. It all seemed very strange to her. She had definitely seen him come around the corner, but left no trace. But even so, he couldn't have reached the corner and come back quickly like that, passing her unnoticed. This man was a complete mystery as to who he was and where he came from. She started to think about other things, but still, he almost broke her arm and still hadn't apologized. She was angry with him. Then he told her, first of all, thank you very much for picking up the letter, and secondly, he apologized to her for his rudeness. She was embarrassed by the apology. Now she had no reason to be angry with him. He was also greatly embarrassed because he had been so rude to her, even though she had wished him nothing but good things. He began to swivel his head in different directions, trying to figure out where to go. He went in one direction, then the other, but he didn't understand where he was going. He was lost in 3 walls, and the girl was watching him with a dazed face. Afterward, He turned to ask her if she knew the place. She tried to answer that she had been here a couple of times. The guy grabbed her hand and pulled her behind him with the words, "Follow me." The girl disliked such stubbornness intensely and pulled her hand out of his grip. The guy wondered if his plan was revealed. At that moment, the girl was expressing her displeasure. She didn't understand what was going on, but she wasn't even going to figure out his plan. So he said, "If that's the way it is, then she'll be part of it too," and he named her Mary. This made her even angrier. She was being dragged into some strange machination, and to top it off, they'd made up a name for her. The guy just listened to her and grabbed her hand again, simply ignoring her complaints. She was about to hate him for this, as she didn't notice that it was very slippery underfoot. Slipping on a puddle, her hand slipped from his arm and she began to fall. But the unknown man managed to turn around again and grabbed her by the brush. By inertia, she began to fall the other way and found herself right in his arms. They were in an awkward situation, and the guy said that if she was careless, she would hurt herself. She bounced away from him, a look of intense consternation on her face. At this point, he saw the same envelope he had. He picked it up and realized there were now two of them. She turned to look at him, but the guy already had a very strange face. He was up to something. The girl tried to take the letter from him, but he was taller than she was, and even jumping she failed. He knew she couldn't get there without that letter. She was angry. Since he knew that, he should have given the invitation. The guy wasn't going to give it up just because of her request, and started to cringe. A little more and she wouldn't be able to hold back. She wanted to hit him hard. Then he said it must be fate that they met here and were going to the same place, so she would have to escort him. The girl learned a little about him. His name was Hearts, but as he said, he had no last name. He was about 178 centimeters tall and a little thin. He had yellow hair and eyes of a rare blue color, and looked to be about 15 to 20 years old. He puts all his thoughts into action. Also, he seemed like a simple man, but it was hard to understand what he was thinking. All of his actions are highly unexpected, and he also seems to enjoy teasing people a lot, so she concluded that in general, his character was very terrible. They were on their way to a meeting in Lumiere. It is regularly made by the Blessed Ones. You might think of it as a regular social gathering, but not this time. Now it's going to be a special 500-person meeting, and fables from all countries have been invited there. Whether to come or not is up to everyone, so it is not known how many will be there. The guy asked the girl what she was thinking, but she didn't answer right away. Then he called her Mary, which made her pay attention. Her only concern was whether Hearts would return her invitation once they reached the meeting place. He did not refuse, but promised to return for her help in making her his guide. The guy turned to her again, but she didn't answer him anything. Then he decided to mess with her once again, and in shock, he started looking for the invitations, pretending to have lost them. Kiana was really scared. If he lost them, there was no way she was going to make it to the meeting, and she had come all this way for nothing. She asked him if it was true, and he had lost them. But that's when Hearts got them. She was petrified at yet another of his taunting acts. He did so, because she ignored everything he said, but she was really tired and just wanted to go there in silence. He didn't understand how she was so tired, since they'd only gone a short distance. And besides, he needed to get there as soon as possible. Kiana said she would bring him as fast as she could, and at the same time asked him to follow her as close and step back a little. Such a request made the boy frown heavily. The girl wondered if he was suddenly so offended by this to her. But all she heard in response was that everything was fine, and he wasn't offended. Somewhere in the crowd, two men appeared. They were walking straight toward Kiana and Hearts. The girl was walking beside him and decided to ask how many people were going to the meeting with him. Hearts told that together with him, there would be 3 of them there. The girl realized that invitations were not so easy to get, and such a larger number did not fit in her head. It was then that the 2 men in the crowd came up close to them and supposedly accidentally crashed right into the guy, but Hearts didn't pay attention. He was telling the girl at that moment that not only the blessed were invited to the meeting, there were a couple of invitations for ordinary people too, and he imagined himself as a simple man who was just lucky. The second unknown person also passed by the girl, but this time she noticed it was as if something had happened, but didn't realize it right away. She turned and looked at the man. Hearts at that moment called out to the girl and asked her what was wrong. She turned around and said nothing. Then he said that if she hesitated, he would take the invitations for himself. She ran toward him in a panic as the 2 began to hide in the crowd of people. 2 twin brothers who passed by our heroes managed to steal 2 invitations. Meanwhile, somewhere in the castle of Lumiere, a little girl in shackles was crying and trying to call her brother and mother, but they were not here. She was very scared, and a blonde-haired woman approached her dungeon. This girl was asked if this was the last baby. She turned around and saw Mrs. Fable. It was 1 child out of 147 cursed. They had something in mind, and were sure it would be enough for the current meeting. Miss asked the woman, she was one of the organizers, if the other fables would be present at the meeting. They didn't check to see if the others were alive, but the results of the invitation sent 21 to 1 Fablu. They saw that 11 of them were going to come. Mrs. Fable thought the number was odd. She thought there would be 10 people, but she wanted to see the guest list anyway. Looking at the guest list, she wondered if there was anything special to prepare for the meeting. But there was no need for that, because as usual, all the other fables weren't interested in what Lumiere was doing. They only cared about their power. Then an unknown another man confirmed that this meeting would be very interesting. The mistress was also sure of this, for she saw on the list one of the most unusual of the fiables, that very Hearts. And so, after some time, the girl and the guy reached the hotel, which was specially prepared for the guests. Kiana was very unhappy. She had to listen to him talk for all 4 hours, and on top of that, he wasn't even tired at all during that time. Hearts looked ahead and saw, already there standing there for a long time, his friend Hale. He ran up to him very happy. He wanted to hear him praise that he was hardly late this time, but Hale had other intentions. He grabbed the guy's head and slammed his face against the wall. He continued to remain disgruntled. After all, Hearts was late. He should have come earlier. The girl was shocked. She wondered if they were really friends, because that's not how friends usually act. After fulfilling her promise to take him to the hotel, Kiana asked for her invitation back. He was glad that thanks to her, he was able to get here alive. But he was already bleeding from his head, so it wasn't much of a stretch. It turned out that she herself didn't mind, since she had to go here too. He was much obliged to her, for if they had been even a minute more late, he would have been finished. Suddenly, Hyle stood up and walked over to the girl, and questioned who she was, and why the 2 of them had come here together. Though she had no particular desire to get involved, she couldn't help but answer him, and told him she was just passing through. He realized right away that she was lying, and he took her by the head, moved close to her face, and said that liars pissed him off very much. Then she immediately stopped lying and said she needed to be here too. But his questions didn't end there. Now he wanted to know how she met his friend. She didn't want to hide anything anymore and told me how it all happened. But it didn't change Hale's mood. He became even more angry at his friend for doing such a thing, for taking away the invitation on the pretext of bringing him here. He cracked him over the head again to teach him a lesson for this behavior. He grimaced in pain and asked her not to do that again because she would be sore tomorrow. But Hearts wasn't going to take the invitation for himself. He wanted to give it away without his friend's instructions. The guy started looking for them at his place, but couldn't find them for a very long time. The girl and Hale began to look at him with stone faces, thinking it was another joke. But in fact it was. The invitations were not in my pocket. Hearts was devastated. Such news shocked Keanu very much. She hoped with all her soul that it was a joke. She started to yell at him with anger. She hoped he was joking now, but unfortunately it was true. Hale interrupted her indignation and asked her why on earth the girl had come here a day earlier than the scheduled meeting. She was already in tears, but she answered. One of the reasons was the location. The hotel was very close. And secondly, girls need a lot of time to pack, and without coming today, she would definitely not make it tomorrow. Hearts and Hale looked at her, not quite understanding, but they had to agree with her opinion. The guy grabbed his friend again and hinted that it was his fault that the invitations were lost, so he would be responsible for the oversight. He continued to speculate. They had 2 more invitations from Hale himself and his other friend, and they were allowing them to take 1 guest each to the hotel. But the rooms were for 2 people, and thus he concluded that Kiana would be sharing a room with Hearts for the night, and he himself will be rooming with another acquaintance of his. Kiana began to express her displeasure. She would not want to room with this man, but she had no choice. She was already going to spend the night in a hotel, so she had nowhere else to stay. Her face was not calm. She was becoming more and more uncomfortable with each word. But Hyle didn't just make that choice. He explained that she didn't know another companion at all, and would be better and more at ease with the person she spent the day with. But she didn't care. Then the guy made the decision that he would stay Hearts, and she would share a room with someone she didn't know. Now that that question was solved, she wanted to solve another. How would they get to the meeting without invitations? He rubbed his face into his friend's sex again and said that he had one idea for this situation. He didn't listen to her after all and put her in with Hearts. They would be staying in room 507 and put Hale with a friend in 603. He suggested she settle in there. Now the 3 of them, and called her to their room, but not until 7 o'clock until they were done talking. They entered the room, and she still didn't understand how this had happened. She exhaled very anxiously, and Hearts reacted. He advised her not to sigh so much, because that would kill her. And then he asked a question. He asked how old she was. The girl was 17 years old from birth. The guy replied that he was about the same age. He didn't know his real age. She hadn't expected that answer at all. She didn't understand how a man couldn't know how old he was. But he didn't think it was important, and didn't pay attention to such things. Then he asked to communicate with him appropriately, not like the older ones, because they were the same age. Afterward, he looked at her and said it was time to go to Hale upstairs. And the first thing, as soon as the guy left, she collapsed on the bed. After such a long day, she was very tired. She continued to lie there listening to the ticking of the clock. She thought to herself, if only it had been if she hadn't picked up that envelope then, everything would have been different. That same night, the 2 guys who stole the invitations returned to their master. The first thing he did was ask them if they were up to the task. In response to a question, they pulled out 2 invitations so he wouldn't have too many questions. These people were very good thieves and never once came back with a failure. They immediately started discussing that it was very easy, and the yellow-haired guy was just a complete idiot. They held out these letters to him, but he replied that he did not need them. Then the pink-haired girl asked him why he was doing all this, since he was the organizer. Those 2 were also perplexed, because the same guy could just check off the list. This guy responded, all to create a little randomness. At the same time at the hotel, Kiana took a little rest and looked at her watch. It was now 6 o'clock. She was told to come at 7, so she decided to change. There was still plenty of time, so she decided there was no need to rush. Just as suddenly, Hearts burst into her room. You could see from his face that he was badly frightened. But Kiana was also startled by this abrupt visit. She was displeased, for who opens doors like that with such a noise? She wanted an answer, but the guy just rushed toward her. Suddenly, another man burst into the same room, which was completely silent. Apparently, he was looking for the guy who had just run in here. He looked pretty pissed off, but upon entering the room, he didn't see anyone and went to look further. He closed the door, behind which Hearts and Kiana stood. He covered her mouth with his hand so she wouldn't say anything. The guy thought he was very dangerous and called him Death with a Scythe. He thought he really wanted to finish him off. Then the girl asked who it was and what Hearts had done that made him so angry. It was that third friend of theirs. Caviar and Hearts immediately ran away as soon as he saw him, so he doesn't know why he was going to kill him. But suddenly, the door opened again with a big slam. The man came into the room and said, "Not Caviar, but Cavia." The guy had no choice but to run further away, but there was only one way out of the room, so he ran to the open window. Cavia was very angry and immediately ran after him and jumped through the window. Was Kiana left in the room, she thought fearfully of room 507. That only meant one thing. They were now on the 5th floor. She ran to the window too, but she wasn't going to jump. She wanted to see if they were alive. But there she saw a calmly running Cavia who was chasing Hartza in a hurry. The fact that they were still intact and uninjured from the fall only made her happy. But what they had done raised one big question. What kind of people they were after all? And while she was thinking, she began to hear footsteps behind her. Hale came into the room, but he was wearing a very interesting outfit. Movie glasses and a big bag of popcorn. Kiana was even more shocked at where he had come from, and so quickly. At the same time, the guy replied that he was just observing what was going on. The girl asked him in a panic what had just happened, how they had fallen from the 5th floor and remained unharmed. He looked at her with a great deal of not understanding, as if only that there was something out of the ordinary. But afterwards, he realized that in front of him stood an ordinary girl who knew nothing at all about their world. He tried to get out of the situation by saying that they were just very young and strong. They would be fine, and it was only the 5th floor. Hale decided to say goodbye to her and bowed out. He wanted to see how it all ended. But no sooner had he left than the girl asked if she could realistically come to them at 7 o'clock. Even in spite of his consent, she had great uneasiness to her friendship. It was almost 7 p.m., and Kiana was holding her way to their room. The only thing she had realized during the day was that these people were crazy. Hart so naturally jumped from the 5th floor without thinking of the consequences, and his stalker did the same, and both of them didn't have a scratch. He got his head slammed against the wall for being late. He reacted as if it was only natural, and if she spends any more time with them, she seems to lose her common sense. And Hale's words that they were just very strong made her very doubtful. They were something more than ordinary people. She really hoped they turned out not to be dangerous. She walked up to their room, but didn't dare to knock right away. She could hear them talking about something behind the door, and leaning her ear against the door, she began to secretly eavesdrop on their conversation. But it was all very hard to hear. She was even a little uncomfortable about the fact that she had become an eavesdropper. It was completely uncultured. But she was very curious as to what these crazy people were still talking about. Kiana was so focused that she didn't even hear Hearts come up behind her. He caught her. The guys who were in the room heard the conversations outside and stopped to discuss their business. Hearts looked and realized what his friend was doing here and analyzed everything and made the right conclusion. He took her by the shoulders and pushed her into the room. Immediately he turned to Hale and called him an officer. He reported that he had caught a suspicious spy. Hale and Kavia were shocked. They didn't understand the speech patterns at all, but Hartz explained that he caught her eavesdropping. Then Hale began to play along with him and ordered the girl arrested and thanked him for a job well done. But Kavia stood in complete incomprehension of the situation. Closing the door behind her, Hart said she had no right to remain silent and hire an attorney. They put her under a lamp for an impromptu interrogation. They wanted to understand why she was doing it. The girl began to say that she couldn't hear the topic of conversation, only whispers and mutterings. But that only made them more suspicious. Kavia joined the conversation, suggesting that she definitely must have had a reason for that decision. They didn't know each other at that point, though she had seen him chasing Hartz. Then Hale introduced him. He was the third friend. His full name was Darren Kavia, and he was very sorry that he had behaved ugly before. She looked at him, and this time he looked normal, not so intimidating. But Hartz began to tease him by twisting his name, and then her assumptions about his kindness immediately vanished. He became scary and dangerous again. Hale explained that in this current situation, they now have no trust in her, and she should tell everything she's hiding. She tried to extricate herself from the situation and began to say that she wasn't hiding anything. But they weren't complete fools. They realized she knew quite a bit about the meeting. It might seem that Lumiere is a symbol of the power of the blessed and a place for political negotiations. However, in reality, it is a place to show your power and make useful acquaintances. And most people go there for that very purpose. But you could tell from the girl that she was interested in other things. For ordinary people, it's a place that's hard to get to even once in a lifetime. And she seemed particularly interested in it, even assuming she was only going there for fun. Having lost the invitation, she would just go there another time. But in her case, it was obvious that she had a specific reason for getting there this particular time. All three of them were curious about this target and why she was hiding it so carefully. Hale was a man of honor and wasn't going to make her say it. He didn't want to belittle her rights, so he expected her to tell it herself. She didn't bother to hide her goal. She just wanted to get there to meet someone. The boy was interested in such an answer. Now he wanted to know his name. But she didn't know if the man was still alive. Perhaps she was just wasting her energy. She added at the end, "What Hartha Fable is looking for." What the blonde heard struck him hard. She had been looking for him, but she hadn't realized it. Kavia asked Kiana if she knew the continent's largest port city, Fable. Mariana, a city destroyed by war, a war called Crisis, a battle between the blessed and the damned that took place 5 years ago. He wanted to say that one of the men killed in the war was Kieran Faleb, and to see if she knew anything about him. The girl revealed that all she knew was that Kern was blessed and Hart was cursed. From there, Hale had more questions as to why they were opposites, for there was no connection. But more details she could not give. The boy thanked her for such a revelation, which had been given to them, and with great difficulty. He sighed heavily. He concluded that she had come here simply because all the fables would be invited. As it was, she was bound to meet him there and ask him a very important question. The boys decided that for such courage, in return, they too should tell all. She was asked what she knew about the event, but she only knew at the level of rumor, that the Blessed Ones often organize such meetings. This was absolutely true, but these meetings were just a cover for their main activities. Lumiere's had a slave market where you could buy and sell the damned. The girl was shocked by what she heard, because such rumors usually do not reach ordinary people. And besides, it was impossible to get to the doors of the underground. It's so secret that naturally ordinary people don't know anything. Hearts entered the conversation. And these three had a special mission. They were asked to find this child from the photo. No one was protecting the rights of the damned. They had already had time to do their investigation and learned that the child would be auctioned off at a meeting in Lumiere. And that meant only one thing, that the child was right there. The biggest and most important people on the continent, the Fables, were invited to this meeting. The organizers had to work hard. To find high-quality slaves, it is likely that children and adults were all caught in the same way. They wanted to get in there themselves and personally buy this child. Their goal was to pretend to be a buyer, but actually save the girl. But they hinted that things might not go according to plan because of one person who asked them who they were talking about. And all three of them shouted out that they were talking about him now. Kiana decided to ask the boys if they were ready for such a dangerous endeavor. After all, there are only three of them. Suddenly things go wrong, and there they'll be declassified that they came to save the girl. It was a very dangerous mission, and that's why they went there. The three guys weren't ordinary. They could also be called elite in a way. Kiana understood the risk of this, and she couldn't understand how these guys could just banter about it now, because if things didn't go according to plan, they could be killed. She thought they were crazy, that they were up to something unimaginable, who they really were. And he corrected her, telling her that they were the very people she thought they were, extraordinary people. He offered her an unusual deal, but a mutually beneficial one. If she agreed to share the risk with them, then for her cooperation, they'll give her the very clue she really needs. She began to think about what she should do, and even if she agreed, how she could help them. She wasn't sure, and she still couldn't quite trust these people, nor did she know if she could learn the truth about Hartha Fable. But she had no choice but to trust to fate. Thinking a little more, she made a decision. She agreed to their immodest proposal. They made a bet, and Heil decided to fill her in on the details of the plan and start by telling her how they were going to get there. She was sent to bed, but they themselves stayed to even discuss their plan. They needed to finish talking, and she was told to go to bed, for this conversation could be very long. She had heard too much for the first time, and now she couldn't sleep, knowing the fact that there was a slave market in Lumiere. Why do these people work so hard for the damned and risk their lives? But no matter what, tomorrow will be a new day, and then everything will be clearer. Hartz, meanwhile, had left his friends and was sitting in a clearing somewhere. He thought he would remember nothing more. But every time he saw Keanu, memories of those days seemed forgotten. He was sure they were warm and happy memories. They were definitely good ones, but still he had a heaviness in his soul. The next day, it was 8:40 on the clock in the center hall of the hotel. Hartz and Heil were waiting for latecomers. And from the looks of it, Kiana was in no hurry at all. They'd been waiting for her for an hour already. Suddenly there she was, in a lovely and beautiful dress. Hartz looked at her, and she thought she didn't look pretty. But he replied that it seemed fine, which made her a little angry. Then they only have to wait for the last Kavia, who was also called an asshole and a latecomer by Hartz. He immediately apologized for his lateness, but he had one reason for it, and it was Hartz. He immediately went over to him and glued on a false mustache. It was to conceal his identity, because if he was suspected at the entrance, there would be a lot of unnecessary fuss. Only Hale was the most sensible, and he asked the kids to calm down because it was already time to get out. A Prague Linnet girl came into the meeting accompanied by her boyfriend. Their invitations were confirmed, and they went out to have fun. Kiana and Heil went next. They also needed to show their invitations. So Heil improvised and introduced his companion as a girl, and put his hand on her shoulder. The checker didn't suspect anything. She only had one question. Who else was with them? The guy behind them. He was introduced as a bodyguard, which made the girl doubtful, for he looked very strange. Hale began to improvise further. He pretended that he was very much worried about his girlfriend, and that was why he was obliged to put a guard on her. The girl looked at them with great doubt and demanded to see the invitations. He only started to pull them out as he purposely showed off his seal around his neck. The seal of the damned. That was enough to confirm their identities and let them all through with no problem. The fact that the cursed one had arrived at the event was heard by all those who were already there. They began to whisper and discuss him. They wondered if this was the man from the very reverse or just an imposter. The fact is that exactly 1 month ago, the damned received approval from the Parliament of the Blessed and formed the very first official union of the damned, the largest in terms of numbers and geographic coverage, called the Reverse. The names of the fables who formed this union have been published, and the name of the man who now takes the place of Head in Me is Hail Fable. Now it was time to act on the plan, and Heil told the blue-haired man to get to it, which pissed him off a bit, and if he heard that addressed to him again, he'd rip his tongue off. Kiana was shocked to hear such a serious secret about Hale, but he believed that nothing would have changed if she had heard about it sooner. Now Darren was to go to the place they had discussed yesterday. He would have to work harder than the others if he had to, but he was better oriented than Hearts. And Hale will attend the general meeting as planned. But before they all started, they were met by an unexpected guest, Cursed from the reverse of June Way. He immediately suspected something, for Hale didn't like to be in places like this, but this time he was here. He noticed his friends as well, and declassified Hartza, but her attention was drawn to a girl he had not previously known. He met Kiana and wanted to talk to her in person, but at that moment, Hearts realized he needed to get her away, grabbed her arm and led the way, citing that she had business with a bodyguard. June was very curious and wanted to know what they were doing here, but Heil was adamant and asked him to mind his own business. And this man was very mysterious and secretive, and the kind of characters Hale hated the most. Following the aisle leading to the auction, Hearts asked the girl to be careful not to go near June Weiyu. She thought it was too early to go there, since the party hadn't started yet, but it was different. The auction started before the party even started. These people first bought slaves and then came there to have fun. After all, the purpose of the gathering is still to meet important people, and this can be done in the second half of the event. The entrance was very close to the main hall, and they descended into the dungeon. They went down the stairs lower and lower. Kiana couldn't believe it that the entrance was so close by. Hearts told me that there were quite a few places like that around here, but it was the one door that led there. He was so drawn into the conversation. What he didn't notice as he rounded the corner, there was a man in front of him. They bumped heads against each other. Along with that man was a fat and nasty woman. She had bought the slave and was displeased that after one such light blow he had fallen. She had hoped he would be stronger. She regretted very much that she had made such a rash choice. After she turned her attention to Keanu and Hearts, she realized that it was their first time here, but they were on time after all. This time, the quality of the slaves was the highest because it was an anniversary meeting, she said. Though she didn't usually buy cursed ones, she found them disgusting. After saying that, the boy had flashbacks of his past, how he was mocked because of who he was born to be. People shunned him, afraid that the curse would spread to them. He was considered a filthy monster that could do harm, his eye color scaring them off a lot. He froze for a moment, so Kiana began shouting his name to bring him back to consciousness. He looked at her and wondered what would happen if she found out the truth. She would also look at him. Still there in the main hall, Jin was pestering with questions, and one of them was whether Hale knew that this girl was a blessed girl. He didn't know why he had brought her here, but made sure to remind the leader that they were enemies to them, and no matter how much time passes, that will never change. They were about to go in different directions. Like Hale said, Kern Fable, and this girl is not blessed, but most likely his daughter. And it looks like she's trying to find his trail, which is why she's chasing hearts. Hale also realized that June was here for a reason. He had been in hiding for a long time and now found himself in this meeting as well. But the guy immediately started to change the topic of conversation. He said that they should go because the meeting would start soon, and if they were late, there would be a fuss. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Hearts and Kiana came to the place where the auction was taking place. A beautiful hostess met them and told them that if they went into debt like that, they would buy all the slaves. The girl looked into the guy's eyes and was struck by their beauty, so she decided to flirt with him a little. She said that such a handsome man should be given a gift and would probably need it soon, and she held out a mask for him to hide his face. But Hearts was not in the mood and simply asked not to be called that and called her auntie himself. She was even angry about it, calling such a pretty girl an aunt. But behind this counter hid the same two thieves who had stolen their invitations. The solemn 1,500th gathering began. Its most important theme was the unity of the damned and the blessed. So many years had passed, and finally today they could find unity. And it began with the first recognized union of the damned reversed. And the first to be presented to the public from the head of the union was Hela Fable. Next introduced the one who invited everyone to this meeting, the head of the union blessing, Cludo Mac Fable. People representing other countries also came, but a member of another union of the damned Ricardo, Mr. Shea Electro Fable, entered the conversation, and he disagreed. After what they had to endure, he didn't want to start from scratch. Heil asked him to stop snapping at him, but he called him the same as everyone else, that he just decided to cave to the blessed. But he was interrupted by one of the members of the Union of the Damned, an old grandmother in her old age, who reminded him why he was here. He was here to hear what the blessed ones had to say. Her name was Tasha Fable, and she was eagerly waiting to see what Cludo would tell them. The guy said that the reason for the meeting was an incident that happened 5 years ago. They need to talk again about that war. All those present were shocked. They had never imagined that this war would be the topic of the meeting. They did not want to talk about it again, and even less to look for someone to blame. Then Cludo said they weren't here for that, but because it was time to learn the truth about Kieran's ignominious death, and also the only survivor of that war, Heart Fable. Today at last the truth, hidden from everyone for 5 years, will come to the surface. And this is their captain, who himself came to Lumiere today. Stepping inside, Kiana was shocked at the size and vastness of the room that was hidden under the castle. Then Hart said that now they will also be participating in the competition. She couldn't understand what he was talking about now. But the point was that rich people gather in this basement. For fun, they just like to play with people. The game they were going to participate in was a battle in the ring. It involved slaves who were released for the battle. This game was like a tournament, and the master of the slave that would win that tournament was given a prize, also a slave. And that meant only one thing now, that Hearts would be Kiana's slave. But she still remained greatly concerned, for it would be a fight, which meant it would be dangerous. But Hearts asked not to worry about him, for he was no wimp either. At the meeting, people were discussing Heart Fable, and they were sure he was dead. But Cludo claimed otherwise. He knew that Heart was alive, and that a member of the Order had kept it secret. Because of this war, the damned think the blessed have stigmatized them. So they hate the blessed even more. At the same moment, the blessed ask if the damned were the first to break in with an attack. But in fact, Only one person broke in, and the way this conflict escalated and the fact that war broke out is due to one reason alone. And they have come to a decision. If indeed all the blame for this war lies with Hearth of Fable, then they blessed one sentence him to execution, and all because they believe that the conflict between the blessed and the damned can be resolved if the culprit is punished. The truth is they need to find out and get to the bottom of something. Why he single-handedly started this war. At one point, one of the participants in the event lost patience. He guessed that Heil was behind everything, and he was hiding the whereabouts of Hart himself. He decided to pounce on him with an attack spell. Kavia really hoped it wouldn't come to that, and he wouldn't have to intervene. But he got between the ringleader and Hale to keep him from attacking him. He demanded that the guy step back and call him Caviar, but the guy wasn't going to do that, and just corrected that his name was Cavia. The man had one urgent matter to Hale, but the place was not suitable, so it would be better to settle the matter by words. The fact that the reverse leader knew all this before and did nothing about it pissed him off. That's when Cluedo rushed over. He had to stop this mess. After all, if they didn't stop and ruined something here, there could be more to come. But this man could not just calm down, because in this war, he lost his brother, and all because of Hart. Kavia was distracted a bit at this point, and then this instigator attacked him with his magic right in the stomach. His face, overflowing with anger, showed only one thing, that he was not going to back down, and the next target would be Hale. Kavia just pretended to be hurt. He stood up as if nothing had happened, and then told his assailant that he wasn't worthy of the title of Fable. And no matter what he thought, there was no way he could beat Hart, and despised him for still believing in a 5-year-old legend that Hart was to blame for everything. But Shay took it as a threat and threatened that if he fought at full strength, he would tear the place apart. Then Cluedo had to intervene because he was in charge, and it was a question of great power, so he activated a spell that restrained Shaya's movements. He explained that he'd gotten worried and was just taking action. He also reminded them that if he started trashing everything now, Hart, who had already been carefully hiding for 5 years, would simply run away. By this he meant to say that it would take a very good bait to catch him, and then he restrained the movement of anyone who had anything to do with Hart Fable and ordered them to just wait for his capture, because he couldn't let him escape like the last time. 5 years ago, he approached someone with the suggestion of teaming up to catch this world-class criminal. In the dungeon, the registration for the first round had already ended, so announced the host, and also introduced the prize, a girl from the nation of Doran. Everyone there knew that this nation was very well known for its knowledge of astrology, and they can get this very valuable prize after the first round. Suddenly, one girl in the crowd, clearly from the noble ones, told her mom that she really wanted one for herself. But Mom assumed this and registered in advance. The other people right behind Kiana were discussing it too. They were thrilled to see such worthy slaves this time, and they were sure that such good ones would be only in the beginning. By the end, only the weak ones would be left. This simply shocked the girl. The whole situation turned out to be much worse than she had been told before. Everyone who was there, including that little girl, they all thought the damned were the goods. Hasn't this been going on for 1400 years? People selling people. Her world changed in an instant. Now she recognized who the blessed ones were. The one who is left alone in the ring will win. He can get the prize and leave. And so the first round began. One participant was sure there would only be a couple people in the first round, but there were more. He turned his attention to the strangest one of them all, the guy with the mask on his face. He teamed up with another contestant, and they both attacked Hartza. But it didn't matter to him how many contestants were against him. He was the strongest one there, and he knew it. He had no problem massacring the two of them. Their unconscious bodies fell to the ground after a single blow. The other slave owners were shocked. They had never seen such a quick fight, especially when one man fought against two. A blessed warrior from a special unit also took notice of this. He was the head of this unit, and the guy's name was Day Halloween. The other participants became very afraid of him after what they saw, but one of them immediately realized, he's not human, he's really a monster. This masked man showed unprecedented strength, so the remaining two refused to participate, and he automatically won. It was the first time such a thing had happened. Even the slave master himself had taken him out of the fight. And as the victor, he was given the key to the shackles that the little girl was wearing. But Hearts refused and reached for her leg. The host tried to stop him, telling him that it was first-class steel and could not be torn with bare hands. But that's exactly what happened. The guy easily broke those shackles and freed the young slave girl. Everyone was amazed at what they saw, but he just picked the girl up in his arms and carried her away from there. Day Halloween himself was shocked. This meeting was very different. He wondered whose slave it was after all, and where his master had managed to get it. He nibbled his fingers unequally. They descended into another dungeon, and the girl was worried about when the girl they needed would show up, but the guy didn't know the answer to that question. All this time the girl was crying. She was scared. She didn't know what was going to happen next. Then Hearts and Kiana began to ask. She didn't want it to go on like this. The more he fought, the more tired he would get, and she was afraid he would be killed. The screaming made the girl even more scared, and she cried so hard she couldn't stop. Kiana started to calm her down and called her buddy a fool for acting like that. The little girl asked, "They're just letting her go like that?" Hearts asked if she had a home and family. When he heard that she did, he promised her that he would personally bring her home. He stroked her head and told her not to cry anymore, because she would be home soon enough. Tess, meanwhile, at the meeting, Shay clarified with Cluedo which way they want to lure Hart out after all. But following their observations from Kern's diary, they got information. From there, they found out that he had special feelings for the children of the damned, and one of them was Hart Fable himself. It was also stated that Hart could not fully control his power, so he was temporarily deprived of it. He'd only used it once, and that was in that very war. Now all they have to do is wait. They have slowly but surely lured him here. They're using the memories he's trying to forget, and are going to do what they did 5 years ago. Trading continued in the dungeon, and a man approached the host. He too was going to participate. He realized there were no more seats available, so he got one for himself. He killed one of the contestants and wanted to step into his shoes. It turned out to be the same day Halloween. He wanted to make a correction to the list of participants. Hearts was unrivaled, taking down anyone who got in his way and easily making it to the last round. It was a very hot meeting this time, and it was all thanks to that guy in the mask. And here, they were already on the threshold of the 12th round. The presenter decided to interview this favorite and learn about his impressions. He boldly declared that he was the only one who was crazy in this territory. It was very bold to declare that this was his territory, and so the time for the 12th round came, and the prize for it was presented. A girl with scarlet hair, which is very hard to find already in this world. It was the same girl that Hale showed yesterday. But to win this time, we'll have to fight not with a mere slave, but a blessed one named Day Halloween. This news really stirred up the crowd. They were sure that this time this masked guy would lose. After all, the general himself was against him. Kiana was alarmed. No matter how strong Hearts was, his opponent was the commander of such a unit, and since all the other contestants declined, These two were the only two remaining contenders. Hearts. First thing he did was tease him, saying he had some weird thing on his head. In fact, it was not just a thing, but in this way he was showing his image. And then Halloween told him to take off his mask too, because they were about to have a great fight. Hearing exactly the same answer, he began to ask questions with which he wanted to piss off Heartso. If everyone finds out who he is, something terrible will happen, and he'll kill everyone here, like he did 5 years ago. Isn't that right? Heart Fable. That's exactly what Day had called him. But you couldn't see his facial expression because of the mask. He liked to see them a lot when they were confused. He didn't wait for his answer and took advantage of the moment. He quickly disappeared from the guy's sight and was at his back. And with the very first blow, he was going to get rid of the mask. But the masked guy was stronger, and with one hand was able to stop his blow. Grabbing his hand harder, he quickly turned around, grabbed his face, and slammed his assailant to the ground with all his might. But this man wasn't simple. He disappeared right before the punch and didn't even take damage. At this point, the masked guy confessed that he was actually Heart Fable. But it wasn't shocking news today. He knew it all along. Cluedo had told him everything, and he was only fighting him now because it was his job to catch criminals. His subordinate brought him a sword. He wanted to morally destroy his rival, and for starters, he struck his mask with this sword to reveal his identity. The scanners in this room immediately recognized the threat, and it was announced over the loudspeakers that a dangerous criminal was now here. It's a 100% match. Day took advantage of the turmoil. He said to Press Heart that all these people looked at him with rapt attention, and when they recognized his nature, they started running away from here. They shouted that there was a monster in front of them, and that they didn't like the idea of inviting the damned at once. He demanded that he leave the place quickly, that he was a murderer. It took a heavy toll on Heart's psyche. Day wouldn't stop. He said that no matter how much he pretended, no matter how much he denied it, he was still cursed. That to everyone else, he's just an evil monster. Memories from his childhood came flooding back as everyone shunned him. Afraid of the curse that might be upon them, they called him all kinds of names. They were afraid he might do harm, afraid of those scary eyes, but Heart held back and turned it into a joke. Hearing being called a monster only made him laugh. Then he pushed the biggest one, saying that everyone in this city is blessed, and they are all his enemies, and even her. She ran up to him with a question about the kern she talked about yesterday. If he was really Heart, he had to answer that question. He confessed his true identity and said that he had killed Kern 5 years ago, and he was definitely dead, and asked her to get out of here as soon as possible. She grabbed his sleeve and told him he was lying. After all, he always does that to avoid the truth. At this moment, Day stealthily attacked Heart. The blow was very strong, so much so that he broke through the wall with his body. He sat against the wall, blood dripping from his head, and he thought about his fate. No matter how much he tried to hide who he was, he would always be judged simply because of who he was born to be. And eventually, when the truth is known, he will be turned away. No matter how hard he tries, no matter who he pretends to be, people will never change who they are. He was going to end it right here and now, but Kiana ran up to him. She didn't dislike him at all. She saw the kind of man he really was. When he was just a child, he first felt love, warmth, joy, and pleasure. He tried to forget this whole past thing, but there was no way he could. Thanks to that man, he was able to love the world a little more. Kiana at this point was trying to heal the wounds she had received, thus reminding him of the past. But he did not want to accept her help, for he considered himself cursed and thought she would be like all men in despising him. He told her that she was only pretending, but continued to think he was a monster. She couldn't take it anymore and slapped him across the face. She reminded him why he came here. And it wasn't to sit here and take offense. He was here to finish his business. So he should have pushed aside unnecessary thoughts and come to his senses. She moved over to him, took him by the shoulders, and told him that before and after she found out who he was, she didn't think he was a monster, and she wouldn't. Even on the contrary, she found it hard to believe that a man as bright as he turned out to be heart Fable. This is the man who promised the little girl he freed from captivity to come home. Memories filled his mind. A moment from his childhood when he was angry at the world. That girl, despite his curse, was with him. He asked not to pretend she was treating him well. He thought she would say he was ugly, and all because he was born that way. But she didn't care. She grabbed his cheeks and told the real truth. Those who called him scary were actually jerks. She believed that the god Fable had given him a test. It was hard and difficult for him now, but when he passed it, he would realize how strong he had become. That his soul would get bigger and he would feel freer. And most importantly, he would see how many people love him. For the first time in such a long time, he felt it again, that someone needed him. He was grateful to fate that he had met such a nice girl like Kiana. He had asked her to stay here, and he was going to finish this fight. Day was shocked. He saw that girl who was blessed become on the side of the cursed one, and now Hearth could not be stopped. Now he had a cause worth fighting for.